So now we come to our guest speaker, Professor Subrat Acharya. As you can see, he's very well decorated. He's a Padma Shri awardee and a BC Roy Fellow. He is currently the Pro-Chancellor of the Kalinga Institute of Industrial Training and Kalinga Institute of Medical Sciences in Bhubaneswar, which has recently been honored by being declared as a University of Excellence. So congratulations, Dr. Acharya. He is also the president of All India Medical Institute at Bhubaneswar and chairman of the academics at All India Institute, Jodhpur. He is also the emeritus professor of gastroenterology, All India Institute of Delhi, and he was former dean of All India Institute, Delhi, and the head of Department of Gastroenterology, All India Institute, Delhi. He has huge number of research publications, and of course he's an invited speaker. We are very honored that he agreed to our request to speak on this. What I need to tell you guys is that Dr. Acharya is actually very brilliant. You can make out, and he's an international authority on his own subject. And the best part about him is that he's able to speak extempore on any academic topic, which is a very big thing. He's so well read. So other than that, he's a state level soccer player, and I invite Dr. Acharya to be with us and tell us about his topic is intermittent fasting. So Dr. Acharya, you can share your screen now.
Thank you, Nirja. Those were wonderful introductions. I don't think I deserve so much praise. But my introduction is, I am a very close friend of Professor Yogesh Chawla, Nirja's husband. And from our residency days, Nirja had been scolding us always that we are not actually right people to do right things. Thank you, Nirja. And thank you, society. I'm also very thankful that Nirja actually asked me to speak on this very interesting subject. And it is interesting as well as maybe a little mundane. Well, human beings love food. All of us wants to go to a 5-star restaurant, have chickens, biryani, mutton biryani, both times, and with 1 or 2 drinks. And that is wonderful. And now I have to speak against it. And that, of course, is not very right. But well, if you see the intermittent fasting as a concept has actually has come up because it is actually a evolutionary conserved genetic mechanism to provide benefit to us. Now, today, each of us consume 3 meals at least and intermittent snacks. But if you see, we are actually process of evolutions. Actually, the slides are not moving.
At the bottom left, just move your cursor. Can you see at the bottom left? It's a faded out gray left arrow and a right arrow.
Okay. Now, if you see the evolutionary concept, we had 3 meals. But our forefathers and ancestors, we started from ape and become Homo sapiens. We see instead of having access to food, they were occupied in acquiring food from ecological niches where the food was very scarce. As a result, they didn't get food always. They got food intermittently. And when they got food intermittently, they have to remember where are the foods. So they can go and search it. So 2 things happened. The brain developed, their imagination developed, their memory developed, they developed language, they learned cooking. Right. However, foods were very scarce. And therefore, there will be a prolonged period when they will not get food. You also know today, after human genome studies, that the similarity between a rat gene and us is about 95% same, with the conserved genes. And also the chimps or gorillas have about 99% similar genes. So you see, the genes have been conserved over the period of evolution, that is about 3 billion years. And what had happened? They didn't get food. They used to get food intermittent. As a result of which, there will be a prolonged period of fasting during which therefore, the genes actually adapted to the environment. That we know. Over billions of years, gene changes, and we have become human from apes, and gene adapted to this process of intermittent fasting in a fashion that can provide energy during this period of time. And the intermittent fasting was repeated. So there is a sustained adaptation mechanism. Now, what is this adaptation mechanism during which they got the fuel? Normally, you know, glucose is the fuel for your energy. They get into the cell by insulin and they burn through TCA cycle to produce ATP. ATP is your source of energy. Now, during this period, when you are fed state, the additional food gets stored as fat in the adipose tissue. So what happens during the fasting stage? The gene processes various expression of various enzymes or proteins or carriers which can digest this fat, produce fatty acids, which actually provides the fuel. In the process, many things happens. And my job is to actually describe you those important events which is genetically conserved and what we have done over a period of time. Gradually, as the brain developed, we count off this process of genetics, which have evolutionary available genetic process of providing adaptation switch or metabolic switch for alternate fuel. Ladies and gentlemen, this alternate fuel doesn't provide only energy. It provides many other protective. Alternate fuels becomes also help facility to transcribe various genes to protect you against many things. I will come to that. Now, if you see what we have done over this period of time, we have counted off this intermittent fasting and see the caloric intake across the continent, which has progressively increased. And unlike our forefathers, Homo sapiens, we are not sedentary. They will walk miles intermittent to stalk prey. And now, along with this caloric intake, you become sedentary. So the metabolic switch or process of producing the alternative fuel is nowhere needed. So you have made most of these genes silenced, which are being transcribed during this period of fasting when the food was not available. You have stopped switching that. As a result, if you see, this is the last which I have produced what has happened, because there is no fasting, the sedentary habit has gone, and all the things you are eating is not necessary for you, and extra calories always in the body get converted to fatty acid, esterified, becomes triglycerol, and gets deposited in your body. Remember, in the body, the subcutaneous adipose tissue has the fat cells where they are stored. And also remember, as Asians, for prolonged time, you don't have those subcutaneous adipose tissue. You have only it is in your tummy. That's your tummy bulges. You don't have in the chest or in the back sufficient adipose tissues. So where they will go, they get deposited in various organs. And as a process, two things has happened. You have stopped the adaptation switch genes, right? Which has many other functions, which I will describe. And those stoppage of many other functions had resulted all these lifestyle diseases. And because of this sedentary habit, increased calorie stoppage of our adaptation genes to produce alternate fuels, right? This evolutionary conserved metabolic adaptation fails. Now, these genes, when get activated by the alternate fuel that are fatty acid and its derivatives, which produce many of the transcription factors in the cell through receptor which are evolutionarily present. I will show you some of those receptor, interesting receptor, which you are targeting today for therapies, actually produces various antioxidant defense. Because during metabolism of fat, there is a lot of free oxygen radical, and it will produce energy. How it will produce defenses mechanism, which will help, which today we know they're anti-aging. We also helped in developing various DNA repair system, particularly the DNA repair mismatch gene is involved during this process. And because of increased metabolism of fat, which is done in mitochondria cells by a process called beta oxidation, you need more mitochondria. Mitochondria, your cell respiration, which actually support your cell survival. It helps in mitochondrial biogenesis. And during this prolonged fasting, you see you are prone to develop, because of certain other region, which is another subject, may have infection, have a trauma for prolonged walking, right? May produce inflammatory cytokines. And it helps to protect the human, evolutionary, anti-inflammatory signals, right? And lastly, something called autophagy. You have heard about autophagy? 2016, right? Yoshinori Moishi got the Nobel Prize for autophagy. He was working on yeast cells. They are Saccharomyces cerevisiae. He saw those yeast cells who are dying are being carried by carrier protein to other yeast cells where there are lysosomes, right? Lysosome evolves. Inside that lysosome, these dead cells are destroyed. Now, autophagy is one of the major preventive aspects of cancers. You told now discuss about PCOS. You discuss about endocrine cancers. Invariably, they are overweight, high calorie intake, insulin resistance. And if you do intermittent fasting, you keep the process of autophagy intact, for which the transcription factor. And we stopped all these things. Obviously, you understand what is the problem, and the evidence is clearly here. So, exactly today, after this background, what do you understand by intermittent fasting and how do you do it? What exactly in cellular level does, I don't want to go into the details, it will be damn boring because basic biochemistry and genetic transcriptions. And clinically, the last two, what are the types of intermittent fasting which can possibly provide benefit, because we need a lot of more evidence after understanding the basic processes of intermittent fasting, and does it have any clinical benefits which has been documented either in animal or humans. So what is done? When you fast, what happens? It is a stress. Stress is also many events outside. You see a fire in your house, you are stressful. Right? You are going to examination, you are panicking, that is a stress. When you have this stress, a fasting is also stress. This is somehow sensed by your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And immediately hypothalamus produces corticotropins, which increases ACTH, which works, right, on adrenal glands to produce, adrenal glands produce catecholamines from its medulla, and from cortex it produces glucocorticoids. What catecholamine does? It increases the fat digesting enzyme in stored adipocyte. They are various lipoprotein lipases. And as a result of which, they are broken down to free fatty acids. And this free fatty acid in circulation travel to liver cell where there is beta oxidation, as I told you. And once they burn, they produce ATP. One molecule glucose produces 36 ATP, whereas one molecule of fatty acid produces 120 molecules of ATP, which is your source of energy, right? And glucocorticoids are other stress responder. When a patient becomes sick, you yourself say, "Acha, usko steroid laga do." This is a stressful situation. What it does actually, right? So actually, if you see, when the adipocytes are stimulated by catecholamines, they not only produce free fatty acid for fuel, they produce some anti-inflammatory cytokine. I told you, there is genetically conserved fatty acid during fasting. There will be adipokines, which are actually anti-inflammatory. And glucocorticoids, right? Catecholamine also causes glycogenolysis. Short period of time, it will produce glucose. I will tell you, 2 to 4 hours it will produce glucose to maintain. But then fatty acid burning is necessary. And glucocorticoids, you know, are anti-inflammatory and increase microcirculation actually. So when you are panicky, you need more energy. Your blood flow to brain should be more. You should be more active. And this is the stress protection, right? And these are genetically conserved. So if you fast, you provide those stress responses in your body and produce all these beneficial substances. So what are actually how intermittent fasting does? It does a metabolic switch or metabolic adaptation. During fat state, you burn glucose through TCA cycle, but during fasting state, you burn fat to produce ketones. And both produce, if you see, one of the byproducts, if you remember your MBBS days, TCA cycle byproduct acetyl coenzyme A. And when ketone burns by beta hydroxygenase in mitochondria, you produce two ketone body, acetoacetate beta hydroxybutyrate, which can be acetyl coenzyme A. They are carbon carriers actually, toggles between this. And in the process produce a lot of ATP. So both are doing same thing. But in the fasting stage, these are transcription factors. They work on the gene to produce various other substances. I listed them, right? These substances are necessary actually for various beneficial effects, which I just mentioned. I don't want to go into the details. And that's what I've written. Fatty acid and ketones are ligands for various nuclear hormone receptor. This receptor for transcription are present in cytoplasm, to which this beta hydroxybutyrate or fatty acid binds. And they set signal to the DNA to produce various transcription factors for this beneficial effect, which I told you, anti-inflammatory, right? Autophagy, DNA repairing, all these things. And during fat stage, the food helps in further cell growth and plasticity. This balance actually keeps a man healthy. You have actually altered this balance by modern day life. So essentially, that's what I told. We need evolutionary metabolic switch has been stopped because the fuel in the fat stage from glucose and in the fasting stage from fatty acid oxidations, right? And these fasting stage obviously produces glucose homeostasis by providing various energy, right? And how it maintains glucose supply for initial hours also depends upon fatty acid oxidation. As I told you, how it maintains stress resistance, reduce inflammation, and autophagy, which are very beneficial, right? And during fat plasticity. So this balance actually keeps you very healthy. So what happens actually when you fast? I told you all the beneficial of fasting. When you fast, there is glucose shortage. You have stored glucose as glycogen in the liver that we all know. This is reserved to liberate glucose, and it happens by catecholamines, you know that. But there is about 100 grams at best glycogen stored in the liver. It can take about 4 hours at best. And ketones are not being produced. You want to produce ketones, which is beneficial, which are the transcribing factors, right? For few more hours, neoglucogenesis, that is from amino acids, the glucose are produced. They are called neoglucogenesis. But for this process also you need some energy, and there is no energy. This energy comes from this adipose tissue burning and fatty acid oxidations, which actually produces ATP, actually ATP providing energy, and this helps actually used in the muscle and prevent neoglucogenesis. Therefore, muscle atrophy is prevented during intermittent fasting. So fat burning prevent muscle atrophy. Otherwise, your muscle will be atrophied by intermittent fasting. And the ketone can cross the blood-brain barrier, right? Muscle can use glucose by this fat burning, and muscle sparing occurs, and brain uses various ketone bodies for its fuel. To do this, you need all these things. That was I was repeatedly telling you, are needing transcripts and factors. Now look, this has been realized since 1930s, and there have been multiple animal studies. And in 1997, these two gentlemen, Winchurch and Sohab, actually published about 42 trials meta-analysis on benefit of intermittent fasting in the study, ignored, completely ignored by the food lobby, sugar lobby, and other lobbies. We would have been wise since 1930s. Now, in this article, if you see, he has provided multiple experiments, very interesting experiments, and where these are control rats which are getting regular food, that is about 24 grams. And there is a group which is restricted animals, right? And if you see the body weight decrease, right, by 58%, and body fat decreased by 30% over, right, 12-week period, or a little more than that. But very interestingly, if you observe, the brain didn't atrophy. Neither the testes atrophied. So your two major processes, thinking and the testes, remain intact despite intermittent fasting. Whereas other organs, their size reduced, and these rats started living longer. They documented that. If you see, forget about all this, these are control rat, these are intermittent fasting rat, and this is their survival durations. These are the details of each group. And the rat which were on intermittent fasting had a caloric restrictions without atrophy of brain or without atrophy of their reproductive process. They survived longer, and therefore those rats enjoyed life better. But at that time they thought this is happening because they are restricting calories and there is production of less free oxygen radical or free nitrosative radicals. Therefore, there is no DNA damage or macromolecule damage. Therefore, the cells are preserved. They didn't realize one thing at that time. They didn't realize that caloric deprived fat, when they are given their portions, food, they consume it at a time. So there are prolonged period of fasting, about 20 hours of fasting. The animal experiment, the physicians who did it or the investigator who did it, they thought they will eat intermittent because their stomach is small. That didn't happen. They consumed everything. And there was prolonged fasting. And therefore, these experiment later on was explained in the term of intermittent fasting. So this is the rat experiment. But there are another interesting thing, very interesting thing, which is very important for us in the clinical practice. You see, I know you all know that it was not practiced because of obvious reason, which I'm pointing out, the pharma industry and sugar lobbies. And there are many books which are ignored, which also publish these studies. But all these studies publish very interesting data. If you see the rats, there are three groups. One group, and many studies. One group were given food ad libitum. One group had caloric reduction, just like previous experiment I told you. of intermittent fast. And one was giving diet ad libitum and they were exercised. They're just left on a hot plate, the temperature, and they start jumping. And they exercised. They lost body weight. But when these two groups were compared, intermittent fasting and ad libitum diet with exercise, there are one thing that was found to be different. There is two things. There is an average lifespan and there is a maximum lifespan. Your average lifespan is 65. But a sizable proportion of persons live up to 95, 100. So there is a group of people where maximum lifespan is much longer. Now the maximum lifespan in this group was 30 to 60% longer than those who exercise and who had food at limit. Remember, this was not subjected to exercise. They were subjected to intermittent fasting. These studies has not been done in human being till then. Now recently, this article I will recommend you everybody are given the reference, which provides a details mechanism and the cellular level, what happens with evidences. But the time constraint will not prevent me. As I told you one thing, that fatty acid, beta hydroxybutyric acid, and many other ketone bodies, right, are transcription factors to upregulate genes for the purposes I told you, for further fatty acid oxidation, for anti-inflammatory substances, for autophagy, for DNA repair, and your protections. Now here I am giving you an example. There is something here, right, which we call as nuclear hormone receptor. You must have heard about drugs which are PPR or paroxysmal proliferative activator receptor antagonist in diabetes. So you use pioglitazone, thiazolidinediones. We are PPR gamma agonist. You used fenofibrate to reduce your lipids. They are PPR alpha agonist. This actually they release or they bind with the PPR, right, receptors, which are there in the cell, genetically present. When this fatty acids comes, the bind is, and this receptor translocates through a mechanism to the nucleus. And the nucleus produce various type of mRNA to produce various type of peptide to protect you. If you do intermittent fasting, you have fatty acids, you have ketones. These are transcription factors. They transcribe various substances to protect you because they are necessary and they are genetically conserved during your evolutions, which our people, because our brain also developed for benefit, blocked it and blocked this benefit. With this identification, the pharma companies are trying to develop ligands for this receptor and selling it to make money on a genetically conserved substance which you have yourself. And as doctors, we prescribe it to our millions of patients. So this I don't want to go into detail. Each of this receptor has various type of mechanisms to actually protect you. Now, for example, I will give you a PPR gamma receptor activity. What it does, do you know, it proliferates stem cells of fat cells and make a lot of fat cells so that they can store the fatty acid convert it to triglycerol and store it. So the fatty acid levels in the blood decreases. This fatty acid causes insulin resistance. Do not allow the insulin to work. So insulin resistance comes down. So blood glucose comes down. Insulin level comes down. Insulin cannot become further lipogenic. Similarly, they suppose actually excrete more of the stored fat. This can also produce anti-inflammatory processes, anti-inflammatory cytokines to protect you. So those are many mechanisms which I was just giving you an example by showing this. I don't want to go into the details. they produce a lot of these peptides, transport proteins, carriers to do these functions. Now, if you see, I told you about that. Now, if you see what I told in summary, the fatty acid gets burned because it is a stress response. Because there is catecholamines, lipoprotein lipase, fatty acid go to the circulation, goes to the liver, right? Where they burn by beta oxidation, forms ketone bodies, right? And these ketone bodies are transcription factors which produce various substances and go to the muscle, heart, and the brain. Produces energy in all this area, increases mitochondrial biogenesis. And since this decreases, glucose, your insulin level comes down. Insulin is also a sensitizer of substance called mTOR. You must have heard about mammalian target of rapamycin, which is necessary for DNA replications. Now we use many mTOR antagonists in suppressing immune system post-transplant to prevent lymphocytic proliferation. Now the mTOR antagonist, actually mTOR upregulation in many cancer has been described, right? Now this is what it does. Similarly, fatty acid actually upregulate other forms of substances. For example, FGF21 is a hepatokine which helps in cell growth, repair, and prevent apoptosis, cell drop, and helps cell survival improves. And you live longer, you remain younger. So in the cellular level, what happens actually is this, right? And there are many biosensors. I don't want to go into this biosensor. What this fatty acid does, downstream signal. So those things are very interesting if you know biochemistry. But I don't want to spend my time here because time is limited. It also, right, besides all these things which I have told, two more things. Microbial diversity in the gut. You see, we know microbiome, I don't want to discuss, but the beneficial microbiome comes into the gut and also affect the immune cells. If you see, Treg cells are a type of immune cell which suppresses inflammation, which suppresses, there are various types of T cell, various T cell type of injury, right? It suppresses and prevent inflammation. So these are the basic responses which we have actually stopped. And since it decreases chronic low-grade inflammation, I added this slide after listening to Nirja yesterday. She was telling inflammation causes everything, right? And this is a method to stop chronic low-grade inflammation by various, right, transcription of various genes, upregulation, anti-inflammatory properties, right? So inflammation, also metabolic disorder, cardiovascular diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, as well as tumor development. This is what inflammation does. How do you increase your lifespan? I told you only exercise with ad libitum diet in the rat increased life, but didn't increase maximum maximum lifespan. Right? It is in your hand. It is difficult. But there are now evidences that you can treat many of these diseases. How do you fast today then? What do you do? When I was a kid, I grew up in a village. Nirja, your husband knows it very well, the story. And I used to stay with my grandparents. And my grandmother will do fast on Ekadasi, on Sankranti, on any Lakshmi Puja, right, on Mahadev's Sikh Puja on Monday. Weekly 3 days or 4 days is fasting. I was very upset. I used to love her. I didn't understand. But if you don't take food, you will die. She died at 100 years without any disease. And I was very upset with her that she is not eating food and she will die soon. I will lose my grandmother. And at that time, through religious culture, our people knew the benefits, right? And they have put into your religious cultures. And we become modern man, very intelligent, very savvy, very knowledgeable, and we stopped all these benefits. And also treating our patients with pills. So Nirja had asked me something called very interesting modern diet. Change of food type or quantity came in, right? Atkins, keto, Wattacher's diets. What these people, they develop this diet on presumption. They are essentially fat containing diet. Why? By that time they understood carbohydrate actually causes insulin surge. And insulin is lipogenic. Whereas you need a lot of carbohydrate to produce some calorie. 1 gram carbohydrate produces 4 calories. 1 gram fat will produce 9 calories. And fat will not cause insulin surge. They thought giving more fat will produce more calories. There will be no insulin surge, and hence there will be weight loss. That was a completely foolish presumption. Foolish assumption diet, I call it fad diet. Robert Atkins, who wrote about it, died of myocardial infarction beside a hypertriglyceridemia. A typical 2000 calorie diet, Atkins or keto diet, has about 150 to 175 grams of fat. Many of them are saturated fat, animal fat, not unsaturated fats. The discussion about unsaturated fatty acid and saturated fatty acid is another seminar. Nirja, I don't have time to discuss this in 20 minutes. What are unsaturated? What do you heard about omega-3, omega-6, saturated fatty acid? What are they? That's another story, actually. So, these are animal fats, kept huge amount of animal fats. Of course, few nuts, right, and walnuts, which has omega-3. But they all cause increased triglyceridemia, increased fatty liver disease, right? And many other problems. They are not good. In fact, there is a control study between Atkins keto diet and a normal diet. There is hardly 0.2 to 2.9% weight loss. And they claim in 28 days weight loss. So in 28 days, that is weight loss. Remember, weight loss and intermittent fasting are two different things. An overweight person loses weight. He is not stimulating those genes. Intermittent fasting, producing a lot of ketones, are actually transcription factor which you need. But intermittent fasting, we can do actually in 3 ways. One is an alternate day fasting. One is in a week, 5 days eating, 2 days fasting, or a time restricted fasting. I will come to what is reduced calorie in Okinawa diet. This is something interesting again. Okay. Now, alternate day fasting is simple. You don't fast completely. Take about 500, 600, 700 calories, what my grandmother used to do, right? At the evening, you will take some fruits and some vegetable soups or dal ki pani. And you can take about 500, 600 calories. So there is tremendous caloric requirement. Remember, very interestingly, I will come to that later on. This is one way, but difficult. It's very difficult today for a person to ask, "Aaj bilkul khana na hoga, शाम को एक apple खाना और एक करेले glass की juice पीना और लौकी के juice पीना." Right? The fellow will get angry on you. Right? You can do 2 days fasting. Right? You will do 2 days fasting with a reduced calorie. And you can eat normally the rest of the day. Not over it. Your normal food, 2000 calories requirement for a sedentary person at best. If you are working, doing physical labor, you can increase up to maybe 2500 calories. Now, what people do today is a time restricted fasting. Normally, we eat at 8 a.m., then at 3 p.m. or 2 p.m., then something at 4 p.m., then 8 to 10 p.m. we take dinner. So we are continuously eating. And our gap is hardly 4 to 6 hours. For keto burning, we must fast at least for 12 hours. The fat oxidation starts at 8 to 12 hours. So there must be period of gap between your meal. I will say at least start with 10 to 12 hours and you can increase up to 6 hours. So start if you are eating at 8, have a lunch at 2 or 3 or 4, then stop eating. Or if you skip your breakfast, psychologically you will be weak. Right? So essentially 16 to 8 hour fasting is the ideal way, time restricted fasting. Right? So this is what the time restricted fasting is, right? Which I explained to you, the first meal and the last meal. First meal say, if you can do this way also. But many people will not tolerate breakfast. So I always say, take breakfast and put your lunch, say around 2 to 3 p.m. and then stop it till breakfast. You give a gap in the night. In the night, don't take much, anything. So does it have clinical benefits, these processes? Yes. I told you lifespan in rats has increased. We need further evidence in monkey and human, long-term cohort studies. Aging has been prevented in rats, but rest of the mammals we need evidences. These are basic biochemical processes, evolutionary processes which you have understood, right? Cellular level, right? In various animal studies, right, as well. And we also know that lifestyle diseases which occur because of this reason, right, if you modify it, the clinical benefit is very much evident in all type of lifestyle diseases, diabetes, hypertension, metabolic syndrome, obesity, all the insulin resistance improve, waist hip ratios improve, and in neurological condition it has been found to be very beneficial, as well as initial information of cancer. Remember, if you have cancer, if you fast, it will not help. Right? Initially, intermittent fasting will increase autophagy. The dysfunctional cell will be carried to lysosomes and it will be engulfed. So intermittent fasting will prevent cancer, but an advanced cancer you make in fast, it's not going to help you. Right? Because he's already nutritionally depleted. Right? And all his cancer cells infiltrated, producing many other chemicals, which is compromising with his life. So what is this intermittent fasting? Simple. It is a metabolic switch from liver-based glucose burning to adipose tissue-based fatty acid burning, producing ketones for fuel, which becomes transcription factor for various beneficial, right, effects in human body, which prolongs life, prevents aging, corrects chronic diseases, prevents cancer. Right? Does it have some evidences? I'm a gastroenterologist, a liver disease specialist. Fatty liver disease is a big problem. Now we'll not go into this. These are randomized trial. If you see, there are 3 groups of people. These are controlled diet. Right? This is alternate day fasting. This is restricted time fasting. See the changes in body weight in 4 weeks and 12 weeks. Right? Changes of fat mass in this 2 group in comparison to control. Significantly better. Now, if you see the lipid levels, the same changes, very nicely documented, which are harmful, you know that. And if you see, we also from all these metabolic parameters calculate something called fatty liver index, which is based on triglyceride, body mass index, weather circumstances, right? A discriminate equation has been found out on which in an individual you can find the fatty liver index, FLI. So this actually indicates the total amount of fat you have liver as well as in the body, which is proportional. If you see both with diabetes mellitus and non-diabetic subjects, right, the fasting reduces fat markedly in all subjects. It reduces markedly. And if you see the fatty liver index with fasting also improves tremendously in such patients. These are clinical data in human beings. And the same thing both in diabetes, non-diabetics, all subjects. If you see the fatty liver index with the duration of fasting, with the, as a prolonged fasting duration or number of months you do intermittent fasting increases, that progressively improves, right? And it correlates with very much with the body weight changes. So, what is hurdle? They are very difficult. From childhood, all of us are eating and eating and eating and eating. Any celebration, we call for a party. Any discussion, we go to the cafeteria. Any meeting, we serve a cup of coffee with biscuit and kaju and kismis and something and sweets. Now, very difficult now. We cannot have a meeting without those things. Now, meal modification may be very difficult in diabetics. You need special design. So controlling, I say only controlling hunger for first few weeks is probably important. Just like doing exercise. Or just like stopping alcohol in alcoholic beverages. Or smoking. The first few weeks is very difficult. You can start incremental fasting. I've written here 12 hours. Don't do it. Do it for 10 hours. Then increase it 12 hours. Then increase to 14 hours. Then 16 hours. And maybe do it 16 to 8. And sometimes intermittently for a month do alternative fasting. And ladies and gentlemen, that will provide benefit to all your organs. Thank you very much.